Hi everyone, my name's Fabian. With me here is my colleague Mike. We're both program managers for Azure Files and Azure File Sync, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about our product. So Mike, maybe you start us off with talking a bit about Azure Files as a type of storage in Azure and give us an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So Azure Files is just a fully managed file service in Azure. So with a couple of clicks in the portal or a few API calls, you can get a file share. And there's no VM to manage or anything like that. It's just a file share, fully managed. And you can use that file share for anything you normally use a file share for. So that's like, a broad range of applications, ranging from applications that need like hard drive level of performance all the way up to applications that need like all SSDs. So you can choose between the different performance tiers in Azure Files. Also, it's good for like general purpose file sharing, right? So just information workers that want to store documents and things like that. You can connect to these shares from within Azure. You can connect to them directly from on-prem over SMB, like reaching up into Azure to connect to your share. And we also have a hybrid mode where you can actually connect to your Azure file share through a local Windows file server.
That sounds very interesting. So hybrid is sort of the term of the hour. Lots of companies start or have their file services on premises today, and they're looking at how do I modernize, how do I solve some of the issues that I have on premises today. So tell me more about hybrid.
Yeah, so our hybrid story is really interesting, especially if you already have Windows file servers running on-prem. It's super easy. All you got to do is install an agent on these Windows file servers, connect them up to Azure Files, and we will actually sync the data between on-prem and the cloud. Now, the great thing about that is that your on-premise users don't have to change anything. They still go through that Windows file server they've been using all the time. Active Directory still works. They can mount the drives. They can connect directly, whatever they want to do. And then Azure Files, through a product that we call Azure File Sync, will actually synchronize that on-prem server with Azure Files. And you can then turn your on-prem server into just a cache. So you don't have to store all the data on-prem anymore. You can grow in the cloud, as you need to. And on-prem, you don't have to grow your footprint anymore.
I think that's very important. Like fixed storage footprint on premises, just storing the hot data that's really relevant on-prem is a very important aspect of the whole hybrid equation. What happens if I want to access a cold file that I don't have on premises anymore? How does that work?
Sync that takes care of that all transparently. So Sync will actually go to the cloud, fetch the file, and give it back to the user. They won't really be able to tell the difference, except, of course, we had to go to the cloud to get it. So it might take a second and a half instead of a half a second.
Sounds good. So, and most of the access requests go against the hot data anyway, so it's already cached on the server, which makes this just the same experience that customers used to have on your file server. Right. That's great. All right, so let's keep switching gears. Let's talk about how do I protect my data? Like how resilient is Azure Files? What can I do to offload some of the other on-prem tasks that I have?
So there's a few different aspects of that. One of it is the redundancy level that you're going to choose. So Azure supports a few different redundancy levels. You can have locally redundant data where we store 3 copies of your data. You can have zonally redundant where we store 9 copies of your data all across different areas in the same region. Or we have geographically redundant where you can actually have data in like 2 different Azure regions. Now on top of your redundancy level, you can also take snapshots. All right, so point-in-time snapshots of your data. And we integrate with Azure Backup as well, which will actually manage when those snapshots happen, like set up a schedule, and also orchestrate restore. So you can do item-level recovery or restore entire shares and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's excellent. So I no longer have to worry about on-premises backup because all of my data is syncing to the cloud. So cloud backup in the cloud takes care of all of my data, right?
That's right.
Excellent. So no more additional storage on-prem for backups, no more backup licenses, no more nothing on-prem. I can completely handle this in the cloud. That's great. Excellent.
Yeah, and like I said, it's super easy to set up, and I'm ready to see your demo.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's go look at how this thing actually works.
Okay. So what we're going to see here is we are going to see connecting Azure File Share to an existing Windows file server. So to do that, there's really 3 steps. One is creating the Azure File Share in the cloud. Another is installing an agent on the on-premise file server. And then we create a storage sync service, and that actually does the synchronization between that Azure File Share and your on-prem Windows file server.
Exactly. So let's dive right in and take a look. So what we have here is the Windows server that we want to enable Azure File Sync on. So all we have to do as a first step is we have to get the agent, just as Mike said. download install an agent. So we can get it from aka.ms/afs/agent. And there's also more places in the Azure portal where you can see that link, so you don't have to write it down right now. So when we are on the Download Center page, we can see that there are multiple different agent versions available here. They support each a different Windows Server OS. So we have something for Server 2012 R2 all the way up to Server 2019. So the one that I'm using is a 2019 server, and to not make you watch a download, I've already pulled down that MSI right here. So I can double-click and start installing it. So it's a fairly quick installation, just using the default directory. If I want to set up a proxy that is specific to just Azure File Sync, I can go ahead and set that up. In this case, I don't need that. Yep, Microsoft Update sounds good. But there's also another update option, which is actually the worry-free, most convenient option that you can imagine. There is this automatically update option here. So every time a new version becomes available of the Azure File Sync agent, every time a new version GAs, the server will automatically notice that and will then start to incorporate that new update. It'll download the bits, and it'll start making sure that the agent is patched to the latest version. So you never have to worry about this agent timing out or not being supported anymore. It'll just keep updating itself.
And what about restarts? Because this is a live file
Correct,
server.
yes. Restarts are sometimes required, so we can't always avoid them. They're rare, but if they happen, the way this operates is it downloads the agent, it installs it to a specific point, and then it waits for you to restart on a normal scheduled restart.
It'll never restart automatically.
It won't restart your server. It'll sit there, it'll wait, and still operate on the old agent version until you're ready to restart the server. And then once you do that in your ordinary patch cycle, then the next time server comes up, it's just the latest agent version.
Okay.
All right, so let's go ahead, install that agent right here.
And as this is going, just reminding people that, so we're installing this local agent, and then we're going to go to the Azure and create a file share.
Correct. So we set up storage in Azure, and then we set up sync in Azure. These are the two steps that are coming after we installed the agent. And there is a sort of a point 2 step in there as well, which is we're actually creating a trust relationship from the server, so that you can manage the server and all the sync relationships in the cloud in a secure way.
Got it. And even though you're installing this agent right now, this local file server is still able to serve files.
Correct. So yeah, it's fully functional. I'm currently installing it. I've just finished installing it, but I can access the local namespace. Here are the different volumes that I have available. Here's my permanent storage, and here's just my ordinary directory that we're going to sync in a bit. And right now the agent is installed, but I can go ahead and access any file on here. That's not a problem.
Got it.
So now that we've installed the agent, this update agent here automatically pops up and kind of looks for updates. So just in case I have an old MSI lying around, this one will automatically notice that there is a newer version and pull that down for me. In this case, it's a very recent one. I don't have to apply any updates. And now after a couple of seconds, we're actually getting into the server registration utility. But to give that server registration, that trust creation that I've just talked about, we're actually going ahead and go back to the Azure portal, and we'll set up a couple of resources. Now it's about setting up storage and setting up sync.
Okay.
So let's start with storage first. I have my resource group where I want to put stuff in. And so an Azure file share lives in a storage account. So just as blobs and files and tables and queues do as well, file shares are being created inside of a storage account. So I'll create a new storage account here. And now that I have my storage account selected, I just need to answer a couple of different questions, and I basically give it a name. I can give it a location. we should pick a location that's close by to my file server so that the file server has low access latency to the Azure data center. And then I can select whether or not I need performance, like a premium performance of my file share or not. It's really not needed in this case.
It's a general purpose file
It's a general
sharing.
purpose file sharing. If you have a performance app in the cloud that wants to access the file share natively, maybe you need the IOPS and throughput to do that. If all you want to do is Azure File Sync, you're fine with just standard performance. And here's what you mentioned earlier, where you can select locally redundant or geo-redundant types of storage, and we can set that up. So I'm not going to go create that now because it takes a moment to deploy. I already have one created here, and we'll now go ahead and select that one. And we can see inside here we have the different types of storage I was mentioning earlier. And in the files section, I can go ahead and create a new file share. So I'm just going to call that the study file share. I can give it a quota or not. In most cases, that's not needed. So I'll just create the file share so it can grow to the maximum size. There are 5 terabyte file shares. There are 100 terabyte file shares. And you'll get 100 terabyte file shares globally in just a couple of weeks.
That's right.
So, all right. So we have our storage created. And now it's up to the next step, which is setting up sync. So I'm going to add a new resource to my resource group. And this time, we're going to search for Azure File Sync. So and with Azure File Sync, we'll see that we can create what's called a storage sync service. And that's rather simple to do. We can give it a name. Just going to give it that name. And we're going to pick a location, and that location must be the same location as the storage account that we selected.
Got it.
So that sync is always in the same region as the storage that it actually syncs with. And so now we can go ahead, review, and create. So it's deploying that storage sync service right now. So in just a couple of seconds, we're done deploying it.
Okay.
And when we go here, we can now see 2 main sections here. There is a convenient getting started section where you can learn a bit about Azure File Sync, get to our documents. There is a registered server section, and this is, by the way, also where you get the link to download the agent. So we've already downloaded the agent, and now we need to register the server. So we need to make the server appear here. So to do that, I go back to my little utility that popped up. I say, yep, I want to log into the public cloud. And now I need to provide my credentials.
Okay, and this is actually logging into Azure, right? This is like registering the server with Azure?
So what we're doing right now is we're logging into Azure to get a list of all the available storage sync services that are in my subscription that I could register the server with.
Got it.
And so as this is logging in, I have to do the second factor authentication here. All right. So that should get me in. There we go. Now what it's doing in the background is it's fetching all the resource groups that I have, all the subscriptions that I have, and is going to allow me to, so I'll pick the subscription that I'm interested in. Then I pick the resource group that I'm interested in. And then I pick the storage sync service, and we just call it test. So
Yep, and that's the one you just created.
that's the one I just created. So now I hit register. I have to authenticate one more time. In the future, we're going to take that out. And now we can register the server. Oh, registration is successful. There we go. So now I can actually go back to the Azure portal, and I can hit refresh here. And here is our freshly deployed Windows Server 2019, where we just installed the agent.
Got it.
So the next step is to tell the server to sync something.
Yep.
So what do we want to sync? Here on the server, we talked about this particular path. So that's what we want to sync. So we go to sync groups. We say new sync group. And we're going to give that sync group a name. I'm going to call that study. we're going to select a storage account. So here is a storage account that we can choose from. I'll choose that. Here's our study Azure file share that we've just created. And so now I can set up that sync group. So what we've actually done now is we've created a sync group. If I refresh here in a second, we're also currently creating a cloud endpoint. And that cloud endpoint is the location in the cloud. It's the Azure file share that we want to sync with.
Okay.
So now we need to say what server and what path on the server should sync with it. So that's the server endpoint. So now that we have that, we can go ahead, add a server endpoint. And here's our registered server. That's the VM that I was on. And we can decide if we want cloud tiering. And in this case, I say, yes, I want cloud tiering. And I want to keep 20% of my disk space free so users can operate and applications can paste new data. And as I'm getting less than 20% free space, then I'm starting to have cold, basically tiering kick in and kick out the cold files that nobody's interested in. So with that said, I'm going to specify the path that we want to sync. That path is this one. I'm just going to grab it and put it over here. And I'm going to say, go ahead, create.
Cool. Now you're adding one server here, but it's pretty clear in the UI, but I just want to point it out to people that you can just add lots of servers.
Exactly. So if you have branch offices and you want to share the same set of data to many other branch office servers, absolutely, you can do that too.
All syncing to the same Azure file share.
All syncing to the same file share, getting the same data.
Yep.
Everything works very seamlessly. So this is currently provisioning. As we're going through the individual steps, we can see that we're all the way down to enabling sync. So it's actually talking to the server right now to tell it, go start sync on that location that we specified.
And the local file server is still up and running this whole time. There was zero downtime.
Correct. So there is absolutely zero downtime. If I refresh, I can see that we've enabled sync now. And as that server is now starting to sync, we can actually go back to the Azure file share. So here's our list of sync groups. We can actually go back to our Azure file share. Here's the storage account where that file share is in. And we can look at the file share. It's right over here. And even before I was able to wait, data is already flowing in. It starts with some directories, then it goes into the subfolders and fills them out. So it's really, really quick to start moving some data.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
Thank you.
All right, so I think the main takeaways here is if you have existing Windows file servers, it's super easy to connect them up to Azure Files using Azure File Sync. It's not just for Windows file servers. You can migrate from other places too, but hope you check out Azure Files.
Definitely.